Hi there, Isha here, and welcome to this episode of Higher Life TV, where we take concepts that are considered esoteric, spiritual, or new agey and help you turn them into practical tools that can greatly improve the quality of your life. I call this education for your soul, that is really helping you to become empowered. And in this episode, I want to talk about what is an archetype and why is it the most important driver of empowerment in the human experience. An archetype is essentially, at least when we're talking in the context of personal transformation, a pattern, an energy pattern. And that energy pattern drives the way we think, the way we act, the way we behave in relation to other people. It is essentially what programs us to live in the world the way that we do. And often when we think about who am I and we answer that question, we're often actually tapping into who we are archetypally. Now, the biggest issue that we have as human beings is that we are born into life with very little choice or absolutely no choice about the conditions that we are born into. We are born as babies into a family. That family lives within a particular culture, in a particular nation, at a certain time in history, and in a particular set of conditions. And that family also has a very specific level of maturity in the way it engages with the raising of children, the way that it engages with attachment of a child, and the kind of belief systems and primal patterns that a child is raised within. So essentially what this means is that from birth, you come out and you just experience yourself as being alive in the world. And who you come to understand yourself to be is shaped by that family, that culture, by the attitudes that that culture has towards your gender, your body, or your mind. All those things are shaped from external forces that are just projected onto you as a baby. And you pick that up, you identify with it, and you actually develop yourself along the lines of that programming from birth right through to early adulthood, around 21 years old. And if at no point you come to challenge that version of yourself, you can basically live your entire life understanding yourself to be this very conditioned person, a person that has been designed by the social context that you have been born into. And we call this the ego self, the socially conditioned self. And it is a self that primarily survives on being accepted within those socially conditions and successful within those social conditions. It is a self that is always striving to be recognized, because in being recognized, it stays alive and it stays safe and stays secure. But it is in fact a false self, a completely made up self to one degree or another. So this brings us to the question of, who am I really? What is my true self? And if we're no longer able to look at the outside world to give us that information or that insight into ourselves, we're kind of left wondering, how can I possibly work out what my true self is if the outside world doesn't have the answer? No one else knows that about me. And what has happened over time is we have come to understand core drivers or core patterns that all humans share to one degree or another. And we call these archetypes, and they help us understand who we really are. Now, the interesting thing about an archetype is it helps us understand the absolute worst in our nature and also the absolute magical magnificence of our nature. It covers both grounds, because the archetype is simply an energy pattern, and it can operate in the light or in the shadow. It can serve us it can serve our higher self, but it can also serve our lower self. Now let's look at an example of that. Let's look at a very common one, and one I know very well and very intimately: the mother. The mother is one of the most primary archetypes within the human experience, and it is one of the most powerful. who we know ourselves to be is largely conditioned by the relationship that our mother had with us as babies, the nurture relationship. So that mother archetype, it can be very empowering. If you had a well-attached experience with your mother and you were nurtured and nourished, you may feel quite empowered in your life to be who you want to be. Now, if you didn't have that, which a lot of us don't, your relationship with your mother was complex because your mother may not have had the maturity to attach, nurture, and nourish you in that way because she herself didn't receive that. We'll start to see this archetype play out in different ways. We all know the controlling mother, the helicopter mother, the narcissistic mother. This is where that mother pattern, that desire to love, can be really, really destructive and create a lot of suffering in the child. And we also have, of course, the earth mother, the nurturing mother, the nourishing mother, the mother at her best. When that archetype is operating in that really clean and pure way, she creates this beautiful container that just helps her children to thrive. Not just to survive, but to really thrive within that container of unconditional love. So you can see how one archetype can operate at all these different levels. And when you come to understand that that may be an archetype that is driving your true nature, you can understand then that may play out in lots of different ways if you're not conscious of that energy pattern working through you. So archetypes are the tool that we use. They are the core of personal transformation, because if we no longer want to identify with the ego self, a self that is conditioned by the outside world and may have nothing to do with who we really are, then we need to find a new paradigm to understand ourselves in. And this is the paradigm of archetypes. We don't all share exactly the same archetypes. The understanding is that we do share some core ones, which is the prostitute, the victim, the child, and the saboteur. That's something as a collectively, as a species, we all know, and it drives through us, that energy pattern. But then we have other archetypes. There's probably hundreds of them. And within that, we won't have all of those driving us, but probably around 8. And here at the Higher Life Academy, we actually start to explore what are your core archetypes. And why would you do that? Because it gives you insight into what your core strengths are. It gives you insight into what motivates you to get up every morning and to give of yourself into the world. If you are a pioneer, for example, you're motivated by exploring territories, new territories that can really bring a lot of suffering. It's very difficult to go out into new territories. You have to endure a lot, but your driver is to discover what might be possible once you navigate that difficult terrain. And lots of our major evolutions in the human experience have come because we have those pioneers operating through us that take us into space, or take us into the virtual world, or take us into these realities that we didn't know were possible because they were driven to discover them. We have the carers. Our experience of being human would be extremely brutal, and we know the brutality that is experienced when there is a lack of genuine care, a lack of nurturance, and a lack of nourishment. So we rely on all those humans who are driven by that archetype of the carer archetype to create this gentleness, this softness, this sense of being loved that has helped us survive for so long. Lots of people believe that humans have survived because it is survival of the fittest. We were the toughest, we were the smartest, we were the most brutal in some way. But in fact, it's not true. Humans have survived as long as we have through that ability for kindness, for generosity, for compassion. It's our ability to coordinate, cooperate, and collaborate that has helped us transcend the survival tendencies of most other animals. We know how to rise above our basic fears, to actually seek others out so that we can combine our resources, our energy, our ingenuity, and through that combination, that synthesis, we've been able to evolve into areas that animals have not. So it's really important to understand these things, that we are driven by patterns. We are usually driven by patterns in our early years that come from the outside world, from other human beings and their belief systems, and therefore do not support our true self to be expressed in the world. And the choice that we have is to continue being driven by these patterns that create a lot of enmeshment and suffering, or to choose empowerment, where we step out of that and we seek out our archetypal patterns and start to understand that real power that drives us and the wisdom that each archetype is offering us in terms of guiding our own life and in contributing to this world in a way that makes sense. So if you're really seeking to live a purposeful, a meaning, a prosperous, a fulfilling life, coming to understand the core archetypes that drive you is the first step. So if this work sounds exciting to you and you're really curious about what archetypes are driving your life, I highly recommend the work of Carolyn Mace or Stacey Couch. You'll be able to look those up on Google, who've done a deep dive into archetypes, or you can do the free archetype test at www.archetypes.com. Or if you'd like to dive into this work with us here at the Higher Life Academy, I suggest you sign up for our free masterclass, The 3 Cornerstones of the Spiritually Driven Life, and kickstart your personal transformation journey. So I hope this has been insightful. How would you use this in your everyday life? Well, just become aware of how much your life is driven by that ego self, and seek out one archetype that feels familiar to you and start to view yourself through that lens. That will already offer you a lot of insight to contemplate on. So until next time, take care and love life.